Hi, welcome to the Exchange Recovery demonstration for the Unitrends Certified System Administration course. In this how-to video tutorial, we're going to look at creating Exchange recovery jobs. We're going to perform a granular mailbox recovery mount. That's for the itemized recovery using the Kroll on-track power controls. We're also going to look at an entire mailbox database recovery. Once again, it starts here in any of your environments, in your labs or at home, in your production environments, whatever you're going to recover. Your first question you always kind of have to ask yourself is, how far back am I going to recover today? And usually for Exchange, you do have to go back maybe weeks or months or years and recover something from more long term. Right? But even in that case, you have to go to the cold backup copy target and import it back to the local source, and then it becomes a local backup. Right? Remember, you can also recover from the hot backup target if you have an Exchange environment registered to your hot copy target. If you register an Exchange server through the agent-based asset, you can see that Exchange server on your asset offsite. Then you can go ahead and do a hot local recovery from that replicated backup on your hot target. Right? Today we're going to be focusing on local recovery. Right, just like we've been doing in all the other modules so far throughout this course. All right, once again, anytime you log into your appliance, you do want to make sure you check for any outstanding alerts, right? You also want to make sure you don't have any outstanding error messages. Address those if you have to before you take off and do anything else, right? Just the first kind of things you do anytime you log in is checking for errors and making sure that you have addressed any outstanding alerts, any upgrades, anything like that as well. Now, I've shown you also you want to make sure you check to see if you have any active jobs running against that same asset, right? Whether they're file level agent-based jobs or virtual jobs, existing application agent-based jobs. You don't want any of those to be running either. You also want to be able to check your schedules. You want to check your job manager and sort it by the schedule name or the job name in there. We're looking across our agent-based asset for the applications for Exchange right there. We can see that they run at 8 o'clock tonight, so we really don't have to worry about those two. We've got our file level that this server is a part of down here as well too, and that's going to run tonight at 3 o'clock in the morning, so I don't have to worry about that one either. And then it's also a part of the VMware file level 12-hour schedule down here, and you can see the Exchange asset right there as well. That's not going to run until tonight at 9 o'clock, you can see there, so I don't have to worry about that one either. So nothing's going to run against my actual Exchange assets during my testing period here for the next hour or so, which I'm all set against, right? So I can go ahead and do any kind of test. I don't have to worry about it. But if you did, you might want to disable this schedule during the recovery period, and then when you're done, go ahead and re-enable it back so you don't lose any recovery points from now on as well too. Now, you can also, once again, check your dashboard just to check and see if you do have recovery points. Before you do start to do any restore, make sure you look at your protection summary. Once again, you can filter on the client name in there to start looking at maybe all of your databases on the Exchange server there. So here you can see all the database assets themselves. You can see in the protected column over here that they are true. Now that true value right there for those assets tells me that with the date 3/11 right here, this protection summary tells me that I have a recovery point as of 3/11 for those assets. Right? Could be a full, could be an incremental. I have a valid recovery point. Now down in the backup section down here, once again, you can filter on the asset or the client name. Once again, here's all my Exchange recovery points, even the file level backups, and then these are the database assets here. Right? You can see the last times they ran, the schedules they're all a part of, the number of successful backups as well too, and any warnings that these databases, or failures if there's any, that these databases have been experienced. Now you can't do any recovery from here, once again, just kind of checking to make sure you have recovery points for the asset that you do want to recover. If you want to start the recovery process, you got to go to that recovery tab. Now, under the Protect tab, you can also take a quick glance to see if you have valid backups. Nice and pretty view here. You can see on Thursday today, I have a couple of backups that have ran at 8 o'clock this morning based on their schedule against those two assets. And then I have two more over here that are going to run tonight at 8 o'clock. They only run once a day. I can see successes. I can see warnings over here on Monday as well, too, when I had some of those issues on Monday. Okay, I was doing some testing and stuff, setting up for the ongoing administration module. Make sure you check that module out. We're going to go through some warnings and kind of look at some failures and things like that in the ongoing administration module. And once again, this is only kind of a pretty view. You can't do any kind of recovery from here. You can only create backup jobs and run manual jobs. Once again, under that recovery tab is where you do all of your recovery. All the other modules have been showing you that too. Make sure you're under your backup catalog at the top. Once again, you can filter for your assets over on the far right. This is a complete list of all your assets. You kind of have to scroll and look for the icon colors. But if I know that my assets are all using a common name like mailbox or part of your organizational name, they've all got DB at the end of them or something like that, you can type in either the asset name. Once again, these are file and folder level backups. And then there's a restore down here that I did, shows up in the catalog, right? That's not the backups we want to look at. We're looking for the mailbox database names here. So I'm going to filter on the mailbox, right? They all have that name mailbox in their names here, so it allows me to see them all. Once again, we're going to deal with the support services and the critical users mailboxes here. I'm running incrementals and fulls against those, so we're going to show you how to restore incrementals and differentials today. Once again, we're showing you here incrementals and differentials because in the presentation module, we learned that each of these recovery points has limitations or differences on how they restore. So we're going to show you how to do these different types of restores today. We're going to start with the critical user's mailbox and the differential here. And it doesn't matter what recovery point you look at, you're going to have to know your recovery point, right? If you need to go back to tomorrow at 8, yesterday at 1, whatever those times are, you're going to have to do that. Now, when you want to create an instant recovery for itemized here, you're going to mount it as a file level recovery point. It's going to create a mount point right off of the appliance. Okay. Now, there is differences, remember, when you do a full and a differential on what it does put out through this recovery point. It does put out through this path the entire recovery point that you can view in detail. You can see the path here. It's pointed to a share off of the appliance. So if I go to my appliance address in here, I can now see the Exchange Restore folder. You'll notice, remember, I picked the differential, so it shows the full, the differential, and then the merged folder. Backup 0, backup 1, and then the merged folder. Here's my EDB. These are all the transaction logs up to that recovery point. All right, all the way down. Once again, you'll point your Kroll on track to this EDB right here, and it opens up just like any other repository. You can see all of your content for every user, all their calendars, content, their folders, their contacts, their tasks, their notes. You can import and export all the cool stuff you can do with Kroll on track. Okay, now whenever you're done with these resources and you're done with the Kroll on track, you want to make sure you tear down or remove these resources. So if you're done, and you want to get resources back for the appliance, then you want to remove this. Now, your resources aren't going to be used until you go in and you say, okay, I want to use Kroll on track, and I set a recovery job up and I tell Kroll to do that restore. Then it's going to use the resources, really. The network resources, a little bit more CPU from the appliance side. All right. But you're all done with your restore. You close all the folders out. You close all your maps down. And then you remove this recovery point. Right? You will notice that in the dashboard, you can still see if you have a file level recovery active. It will alert you if they're active longer than 72 hours. But when you're done, go ahead and make sure you remove these things out. You'll see it go ahead and tear down that share from the appliance itself. So if you go back to the address, you'll see that Exchange Restore folder is now gone. All right, and it's now gone off the list as well. Now, that was the differential for the critical user's mailbox. Let's go ahead and show you, right, what the incremental up here for the support services mailbox is like. Once again, we're going to mount this for a file level recovery. This is an incremental point. It's going to run this process. It does take a little bit longer, we learned in the presentation part, because it's synthetically putting this back together from all those incrementals back through that catalog, back to the full. Once again, when this says that it's available in here, right, we can show the details and it'll show that path, but it's not up and running until that says available. You won't even see it in here until that says available on the backside. All right, so it still says running. We're going to wait here. Now it says available. So now we should be able to go back to the File Explorer, refresh again, and now we see our exchange, and we see the full and all of those incrementals down into a merged folder once again. It's synthetically put that back into that merged folder. All right, through backup 1 through 5 is all the incrementals. In that merge folder, once again, if you sort it out, you'll see your EDB. You're going to point that to your Kroll on track, or you'll copy this entire directory out to another location so you can keep multiple points in time out. Kroll will allow you to open up multiple points in time. Now, once again, we do have a great Kroll on track video tutorial on our support services website, on the Unitrends website, that you can view. If you're interested in Kroll, you've never checked it out, you have it running at home, and you've never played with it, it's a fantastic video tutorial to get your feet wet in how Kroll on track really works. Once again, when you're all done with that, make sure you tear those resources down to get those back to your appliance. Right? Now, when we also talk about recovery, there's a few more options you can do as far as putting databases back. Remember, that's itemized recovery for Kroll on track, or copying out that structure from the database level, right? It presents it out as a share to the appliance. But we can also take these databases and we can restore, but you do have to make sure you only check one of those databases at a time in here, right? And you can also filter, and maybe you want to go back and you have some warnings that you can look at, and maybe you even want to go back farther in history and look at even more recovery points, right? It's up, once again, it's up to you to make sure you only have one recovery point selected. All right, I've got 2 checked here, so when I take that second one off now, you'll notice the buttons at the top, they actually show up now for recover and recover files up here. Now at this point, it's going out to the Exchange agent and it's checking the settings to see if I can overwrite the original database. Now remember, there are prerequisite checks. I'm going to show you first how to dump this out to an alternate location. Right, if somebody comes to you and says, hey, I need a copy for Kroll on track that I need to use for months, rather than opening up a share off the appliance, you may want to dump it out to your laptop or workstation, copy it out to some storage. You can put it to any directory you want. All right, any storage, any directory, any workstation that may be running Kroll, put the agent on it and restore it out there to it. Now, there are some prerequisite commands over there for some of the legacy stuff for Exchange if you need it. There is preserve the directory structure and overwrite. Maybe it's already there and you just want to update it and overwrite it as well too, right? Pretty standard settings for over here. In this summary page, you can see here I'm going to restore the critical user's mailbox back to my Win7 desktop, and I can even see the directory and the storage that I'm going to. You'll notice over in your job queue that you'll see one recovery point. One recovery point. Remember, this is only the differential at this point, all right? So if you go over to your recover tab here, remember, we only did the differential here. All right, so then in your job queue, you're only going to see that one differential. This is a single recovery point. Remember, in the presentation, we learned that we only run one recovery point when you recover a differential, as we did for the critical user's mailbox here. So over in your File Explorer then, you'll see now a temp exchange directory show up, and it's going to put back that EDB and all the transaction logs up to that differential point in time. All right, it doesn't put back the full and then the differential, though. Keep that in mind when you put out differentials to alternate locations like this. All right, we learned that in the presentation portion of it, and I wanted to kind of show you that. It's a big difference between the incremental and the differential we did. Doesn't take quite as long either to recover that point. Okay. Now, if I want to start looking at putting back the entire databases once again, I'm going to look at putting back support services and the critical users here, both of these 2 databases, and we're going to look putting back differentials and incrementals, but we're going to look at putting back the incremental Right, here we're doing the incremental alternate location. So here you can see the support services mailbox to the alternate location. I've set that all up the exact same as I did the differential. When you look at this job and its recovery point, it's doing one synthetic recovery point up to this incremental point. It's going to take a little bit longer to run than that differential just did. All right. It's going to do the exact same process and create an Exchange 2 folder based on the name I gave it. And here's my EDB, and eventually it's going to put back all those transaction logs up to that incremental point that we chose here as well too. All right, once again, going through that incremental process might be a little bit slower because we are reassembling that from the full all the way back through this process up to that recovery point. It's not just the differential. Right, you can see these are real small databases. They don't take very long to do for us. So we can see that job's already cleared off the active queue too. All right. Now once again, we got a filter over here on our mailboxes so we can see our Exchange assets. We're going to look at recovering the critical user's mailbox this time. But instead of doing an alternate location, we're going to actually put this thing back and try to go back to the original location. Right, you'll notice right now that it's actually going through and reading the settings from the agent to see if it can go back. And you'll notice that we haven't done any of those prerequisite checks yet, so it can't go back to the original location. All right, we haven't set it to allow for overwrite. We haven't dismounted the database. Right, we haven't cleaned out the transaction logs yet. Right, it won't allow you to make any of these changes in here until you either cancel out of this screen after you make the changes. So if you go over to your Exchange console and you log in as your administrator, so you have rights to make these changes, you'll go down into your servers, you'll go to your databases, you'll pick out the database you want to recover, right? In this case, we want to recover the critical users mailbox database up here, right? And the first thing we want to do is make sure that we dismount this database. Take it offline in a healthy state. We also want to make sure we edit the settings in maintenance mode, and we want to make sure at the bottom here we check that this database can be overwritten by a restore. Okay? And make sure that you check those inside of those databases. Make sure you go back in and verify that that setting was saved inside of there. All right? You can set them for multiple databases. Depends on how many you have to restore, but remember, Unitrends can only restore one database at a time anyways, right? So make sure you save those and make sure you turn them off after you're done too. Make sure you don't leave those on if you don't need those settings on, right? Once again, make sure you go in and verify that those are set. Now that I've dismounted this database, I've made that change, I should be able to go to the Exchange server now. I'll go out to the directory structure of where my databases are housed under the Microsoft V15 mailboxes. Here's my directories. There's my critical users. All right. If I go from the first transaction log and scroll all the way to the bottom of this list, I'm just going to do this slowly to make sure there's no other files in there that I don't want to highlight. Hold down the Shift key and check that bottom one. I can now copy, or I want to cut in this case, all right, I can now cut those databases back and paste them into a new folder. You can call this whatever you want. You know, we're going to call this critical old logs or something. I can go ahead and paste these logs into that directory. It's pretty scary deleting logs off of a server. It's always a better practice to move them to a directory temporarily until you know you don't need them back. Okay. Now that we've got that done, we've got it dismounted, we've got our settings all set up. You'll notice in here it doesn't change anything. I can't go to the next because I still can't go back to the original location. I can bounce around here and change to the alternate location, then go back to my original, and now it's going to check the settings again to see if it can be overwritten. Right? I could have just canceled out and went right back in to my recovery point. But now it says it can go back to the original location. Right? Once again, if I need to, change that, I just need to cancel out before I hit next over there and make sure I can go to the original location. Now here's a nice little summary screen. Once again, you can see I'm going to overwrite in this case to that same target. This does start the recovery job. You will see a job in your queue. All right. In this case, it does put back the differential and the full. You see both jobs in the queue, the full and the differential for that critical user's mailbox. We'll go ahead and time-lapse this for you. Let this job run. Make sure both of these jobs finish up before I try to remount and start that database up. All right, before I go over and try to remount this or do anything over in my Exchange ECP over here and remount this thing, I'm going to make sure that this restore is completed before I remount any of those databases. Make sure this thing finishes up. So we'll go ahead and time-lapse this for you, and we'll come back when it's done, and we'll kick off the last restore we're going to show you. All right, so now we can see that the job's all the way off of our queue. It's all the way done. And once again, give your database some time to breathe after that job finishes up. Go to the back end, make sure you remount it, and then make sure you also take off that setting to make sure the database can no longer be overwritten by a restore. Make sure you save that without that checkbox on. Now, we're also going to take a look at restoring the support services mailbox. So once again, if you filter on your asset name over here, go to the recovery point that you want to put back. In this case, we're going to put back the incremental. And if I go to recover this right now, I haven't done any of my prerequisites. So remember, I do have to come out here once again, enter maintenance setting here to allow it to be overwritten by a restore. I can't overwrite a mounted database, so I need to dismount this database. All right, now it's dismounted. Then I also need to make sure I go over to the Exchange server, go to that support services mailbox, grab all of the transaction logs that are currently in this directory. I'm going to cut those files into a new temporary directory for the support logs old. And I'll paste those same logs in there. I know it's pretty scary, once again, deleting those files off the server. All right, but now I've got my prerequisites done, so I can go over to Unitrends, go to whatever recovery point I want to put back, and put back that entire database. Okay, once again, it now allows me to overwrite that original location. Got a real nice summary screen here, once again, verifying everything that I'm doing, what target, what storage, all that cool stuff. All right, you will now see inside of your job queue in here, one synthetic job from that recovery point. It doesn't put the full and the differential back. You don't see two jobs in there, just one. All right, once again, once this job is all the way done, give your database time to finish up the restore on the back side of it. Go back in here and remount this database when it's all done. Take off that setting for editing or allowing for overwrite from a restore. All right, once again, you have to wait until this job is completed. All right, now while that job is running, I do want to talk about and show you really quickly and mention and kind of remind you that if you have a single instance of Exchange that you are backing up with application aware your Exchange databases, then you can also mount file and folder recovery for Exchange. All right, you may want to go into file and folder recovery first, make sure it's not there, then go ahead and mount your file and folder recovery object for your virtual machine. I show this in the application aware recovery module for VMware. How to recover SQL. I don't talk about Exchange really, although it's really similar. You would open up the share from your Exchange server over here. Once the share is opened up off of the appliance, all right, it's not up yet over here. It still says it's creating it. I don't see a new FLR folder over here yet inside of my address or my share from the appliance yet. Once I see that confirmed over here and available online in my Unitrends, then I'll see it in my Explorer on that remote desktop or in that server. Here, that recovery job has finally been created. Now I see that object over here, and once again in the details, you can see the FLR folder for 111. So now from the Exchange server, if I refresh this, I can now see FLR 111. This is my volume 1 with my C drive. My Exchange is out here in my standard directory. And once again, with application aware turned on, these databases would be in check and integrity and consistent to allow for recovery. You would just go in and copy over and replace in. You still have to dismount. You still have to mark it to allow to be overwritten from a restore and all that good stuff. Before you do this, then you would go into this point and copy this stuff in. Okay, it's the same kind of concept. All right, now notice in here, though, that this is not application aware, right? So you don't see all of the transaction logs for these things. Some you do, some you don't. They're not consistent. I have not been doing application aware for these Exchange servers, these databases. Just keep that in mind. Now, once again, when you're done with this, close out of that directory, that server, and then make sure you remove any kind of file level recovery that you have opened up back here. Okay, and you may see a file level recovery active up here at the top as well too. All right. Now, once again, when this job is all done, you can see that restore is all done. You could go and check your reports and check to see if it was a valid restore and stuff, but normally if it's done with the restore in the queue, you can come back here once again to your Exchange console. You can try to remount this database. Once it's properly mounted up, you want to make sure, once again, you go into that maintenance mode, take that setting off of this database. That's not a setting you want to leave on back there, and this thing's back up from whatever recovery point you put it back as. It's pretty easy to put back Exchange. It really is. Now, once again, you've got reports in here for the recovery history and kind of the summary of what you've done. You can go back in time and start to look across your DC Exchange asset, and you can start to see all the recoveries you've done. Hopefully you don't have this many that you have to put back your Exchange, but I've done a lot of testing over here over the last a few days and few weeks. You can also see in your dashboard up here any recent restores you've done. That's a quick way to get to this restore history report once again. You can see that same information, but this only goes back to the 11th. If you need them back farther than that, you're going to want to run the report on your own in here. Make sure you go back to whatever date range you need to go back to be able to see maybe all of these assets and all the recoveries going back even farther than the 13th. Okay. So that's a pretty good overview for you for Exchange recovery.